We begin right here in the United States, which has shattered its own grim record. Over 1.3 million COVID cases have been recorded in a single 24-hour period. This is the highest single-day surge recorded by any country anywhere in the world. America's previous record was over 1 million cases per day. The data dump came on Monday after several states refrained from reporting case numbers over the weekend. That may have spiked the surge yet further. The 7-day average tally for fresh cases has now tripled to over 700,000 new infections every day in just 2 weeks. This is not the only landmark recorded. The US also surpassed its previous record of hospitalisations per day. There were more than 136,000 people hospitalised across the country as of yesterday. The surge is disrupting schools, subways, offices and airlines. Chicago has closed schools entirely for a fourth successive day. That a result of a dispute between city authorities loyal to President Biden and the state's powerful teaching union. Now the city and the union have agreed to resume remote classes from Wednesday.
I'm pleased to report that the Chicago Teachers Union House of Delegates voted to end their work stoppage. That means teachers will be back in classes tomorrow, and all students should return on Wednesday.
This agreement is the only modicum of safety that is available for anyone that steps foot in the Chicago public school, especially in the places in this city where testing is low and where vaccination rates are low.
Meanwhile, New York City has suspended services on 3 subway lines after a large number of workers reported sick, and the subway's plans for its own employees to return to the office have also been derailed. Deaths across the country are now averaging 1,700 per day. That's up from about 1,400 in recent days. Joining me now live from New York is WION's correspondent Susan Tehrani. And Susan, there's got to be an enormous amount of public disquiet out there because the White House for the last month has relentlessly been telling Americans that the United States has the tools to battle Omicron and this surge in COVID-19 cases, and yet it evidently does not.
2 years into this pandemic, it's hard to believe that the United States, which started really off as, putting out vaccines, and in the last administration, despite the criticism coming out with Operation Warp Speed, is really lagging behind in trying to really get the essentials out and curb a variant that is perhaps more transmissible but less deadly. And the country is essentially at a standstill, as you just reported. So yes, absolutely. On the one hand, you have the politics of the situation, and on the other hand, you really have not only essential workers like teachers, sanitation workers, police officers, metro workers, not coming to work because they're sick, but on the other hand, you have the bureaucracy in Washington on vaccine mandates and whatnot. And then to top that off, ordinary Americans are not getting proper messaging from CDC and health officials on what to do if they are sick, and they really can't get testing either in their hands, standing in long lines or whatnot, going to retail stores to really figure out if they are sick or not. So yes, it is an absolute disaster, and quote unquote having the tools, perhaps the tools are there, but utilizing the tools by this administration has been an absolute disaster, and we should call it for what it is.
Susan Tehrani, live for us this morning in New York. Thanks very much indeed for that update from there. We're going to turn our attention now to those talks between the US and Russia that wrapped up, first round of talks in Geneva yesterday, with both sides showing no immediate signs of narrowing their differences on Ukraine. Diplomats have called the initial talks useful and frank. The two sides largely spent their 8 hours of discussions presenting their different points of view on the current situation along the Russian border with Ukraine. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said that the first round of talks did not make any progress, and the questions on Ukraine's possible membership of NATO continue to remain his top focus.
I don't think you will expect me saying otherwise than to confirm that this is one of the areas where we have the greatest difference of views with the U.S. The U.S. suggests that there is no way that Russia or whoever else may have a say on those type of issues. But we underscore that for us it's absolutely mandatory to make sure that Ukraine never ever becomes member of NATO.
U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman said Washington is ready to make reciprocal moves with Russia to de-escalate tensions, but she also renewed warnings of major costs to Moscow if the Kremlin invades Ukraine. And the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations was highlighting that Western allies are prepared to impose enormous costs on the Kremlin if Russia launches any kind of attack.
If Russia chooses the path of conflict, the United States, our partners and allies, have been clear. We are prepared to impose enormous costs on Russia's economy, reinforce NATO's presence in frontline allied states, and increase our defensive assistance to Ukraine.
Those talks in Geneva were the first of 3 sets of discussions taking place this week. There will be Russian consultations with NATO in Brussels on Wednesday and discussions in Vienna with the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE, on Thursday. The US and NATO have jointly rejected Moscow's demand of banning Ukraine from membership of the NATO alliance. Moscow has laid out a detailed list of other security guarantees, which also include a demand that NATO gives up its military activities in Eastern Europe and its military support for Ukraine. Russia's military build-up along the Ukrainian border has sparked concerns of a possible military escalation between Russia and Ukraine. But Russia has repeatedly denied claims that it has any plans to invade. The president of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, has blamed Islamist militants for the unprecedented violence that hit the country over the last week. He's asserted that his country weathered an attempted coup d'etat. According to Tokayev, the attempt was coordinated by what he called a single centre. Speaking at a meeting of the Russian-led CSTO military alliance, Tokayev said that order had now been restored across Kazakhstan, but that the hunt for what he called terrorists was ongoing. He also added that foreign fighters from Central Asian countries, Afghanistan and the Middle East were involved.
Опасные угрозы для безопасности страны предотвращены. В рамках антитеррористической операции ведется работа по выявлению лиц, участвовавших в преступлениях. На сегодня в органы полиции доставлено около 8 тысяч лиц. Правоохранительными и специальными органами проверяется их причастность к актам терроризма, убийствам, мародерствам и иным преступлениям.
Those protests, of course, were sparked by rising fuel prices in Kazakhstan. The government released a video that shows protesters clashing with police. The footage also showed a burnt-out building, which the government says was a television studio. Damaged police cars in Shymkent city can also be seen. In the aftermath of the Kazakh unrest, Russian President Vladimir Putin said the Russian-led CSTO bloc will stymie any coups. He said the military alliance would not allow its member governments to be toppled by so-called colour revolutions that have taken place elsewhere in former Soviet states.
Communicated with representatives.
мы понимаем, что события в Казахстане не первая и далеко не последняя попытка вмешательства извне во внутренние дела наших государств. Я здесь согласен с Александром Григорьевичем. И принятые по линии ОДКБ меры ясно показали, что мы не позволим раскачивать ситуацию у себя дома и не дадим реализовать сценарий так называемых цветных революций.
Earlier, we spoke to Russian affairs expert and veteran Moscow correspondent Fred Weir, and he shared his assessment of the Kazakhstan unrest and his views on the country's president labelling protesters as terrorists.
Is what they say, and they have considerable amount of evidence. There are other theories. Of course, the socioeconomic situation, especially in Western Kazakhstan, where these protests started, is very dire. The doubling of gas prices was obvious, the kind of shock that creates protests anywhere in the world. But the way that violence accelerated, the way it spread around the country, there's mounting evidence that it was organized and or channeled. At least the protesters might have been genuine, but something happened. People were directing them. Police disappeared from the streets. So there is a theory also that it was part of an internal power struggle in Kazakhstan that forces inside the country were directing this in an attempted coup, which is what Mr. Tokayev said. But the Russians have been, for many years now, since the Americans indicated they were getting out of Afghanistan almost a decade ago, they've been extremely concerned about what would happen after. I know I've written several stories about this, going and talking to Russian security experts, and it was a major obsession of theirs, security in Central Asia. And the Russians have said that the rather disorderly American withdrawal from Afghanistan last year created a vacuum, and they say that this may have in some way stimulated the movement of armed gangs. Afghanistan may again be becoming a platform for those radical militants to spread around the region. This is certainly something Russia's been concerned with, and its allies as well. And these events have triggered their fears extremely much.
Shifting focus now to Nicaragua, where the country's strongman, Daniel Ortega, has been sworn in as president for a fourth consecutive year. Alongside him, First Lady Rosario Murillo, who was also sworn in for a second term as vice president. The inauguration comes at a time when fresh sanctions are being imposed on the country by the United States and its European Union allies. These sanctions are laid against members of Ortega's government for allegedly rigging elections that took place last November. On November the 7th, Ortega was elected to his fourth term in office. The election faced widespread criticism after his potential opponents were arrested. A total of 40 opposition figures and 7 presidential challengers were imprisoned in the months leading up to the election. And the Ortega regime has been hit by rounds of condemnation and sanctions ever since the vote. In the latest, the European Union announced fresh sanctions against individuals it accuses of undermining democracy and human rights in the country. The sanctions are also being imposed on Ortega's daughter and son. They're both working as presidential advisors. Meanwhile, here in Washington, the U.S. Treasury has imposed sanctions on 6 regime officials, including 2 generals, the defense minister, the head of the Supreme Electoral Council, and officials with the country's telecommunications regulator, who allegedly ran a social media troll farm to help Daniel Ortega win the elections. The US State Department released a statement saying, quote, "We today sanction 6 members of the Ortega-Murillo regime for currently serving as officials of the government of Nicaragua." The statement went on, "We are undertaking these economic sanctions and visa restrictions to promote accountability for the Ortega-Murillo regime's escalating authoritarianism and abuses." Mocking the sanctions imposed on his regime, Ortega called them nothing but a decoration for the sanctioned officials, something of an honour. But he also said they were cowardly and cruel. According to the US State Department, Nicaragua has at least 170 political prisoners in custody, with many receiving inadequate food and medical care. A week after North Korea launched what it claims to be a hypersonic missile, Pyongyang has now fired a suspected ballistic missile into the Eastern Sea. The latest launch by nuclear-armed North Korea underscores leader Kim Jong-un's New Year's vow to bolster his military capabilities as part of the country's policy priorities for the new year.
North Korea fired what was believed to be a ballistic missile on Tuesday, the second within a span of days. It comes after leader Kim Jong-un threatened more military advances in a New Year's speech. The latest launch has already drawn fire from neighbors, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida.
Under these circumstances, it's very regrettable that North Korea continues to launch missiles.
And South Korea's National Security Council expressed strong regret at an emergency meeting, saying the repeated offense risked destabilizing the region. Officials added it's cooperating with U.S. allies to closely monitor the situation. The launch underscored Kim Jong-un's New Year promise to bolster the military as peace talks with South Korea and the U.S. have stalled. North Korea has said it is open to talk, but only if the U.S. and others drop hostile policies such as sanctions and military drills. UN Security Council resolutions ban North Korea from all ballistic missile and nuclear tests and have imposed sanctions over the programs.
Every tourist falls in love with the coral reefs of the Maldives when they visit the islands, but those reefs are now threatened by global warming. Rising sea temperatures can kill delicate coral reefs, and while this is a big threat to tourism in the Maldives, some commentators are now suggesting it can be turned into an opportunity. Experts call it coral propagation. They're hoping the Maldives will emerge as a world leader in protecting coral reefs. Here are the details.
These are the coral reefs of the Maldives, a major tourist attraction and a diverse paradise. Everywhere you look around the islands, you will find these colorful reefs. But they're not just for tourism. These corals are crucial for the existence of the islands. They act as subterranean water breakers, protecting most of the islands from erosion. They nourish the beach with the new sand, and they provide a home for reef fish. But these coral reefs are now in trouble. Most of them damaged, bleached or degraded, all because of climate change. Recent spikes in sea temperatures are ravaging the corals. So what can the island nation do to save these reefs? One option is coral propagation. Coral propagation is done by cutting frags. These frags are taken from a larger coral reef. These are then used to grow a new one. The growing time is about 5 months. These are then replanted to see how fast they grow and how resilient they are compared to the natural reefs. For the Maldives, mass-scale coral propagation could become crucial. The islands can focus on trying to create corals that grow rapidly and tolerate a more challenging environment. Coral propagation could give the islands a chance to protect their reefs and also themselves from climate change. South Asia Bureau WION World is One.
Finally, no spoilers in our last report today, but after winning the battle in the multiverse, Marvel's SpiderMan is winning over the global box office as well. For more than 4 weeks now, we leave you with a report on Spidey's success. I'm back tomorrow. Thanks for watching WION Live Broadcast from Washington.
I love this character more than anything. It's changed my life, and it's been such a roller coaster. And meeting these guys and working with these guys for the last 6 years has been such a joy.
Now that everybody knows, you don't really have to hide or lie to people.
Like, how do you tell someone that you're Spider-Man?
The entire world is about to forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man.
Wait, everyone?
Hello, Peter.
Many other
this is right, Arab.